Welcome everybody to Crystal Kyle and Friends. Today we're going to talk to Naomi Klein. She wrote, was it a book or an article that was on?
Article.
It was
End
an
Times
article
Fascism.
on End Times Fascism. Yeah, and she talks about how basically Elon Musk and Donald Trump appear to be in some sort of a weird cult where they know the world is ending, and so they're trying to prep for that future in terms of giving themselves all the resources and all the money. Really good stuff.
Well, and they know the world is ending because they're helping to end the world.
Right.
So that's how they have the insight to know that's happening. But I thought she had some really important insights there. That article she co-authored with another person came out maybe about a month ago. And her insights have really stuck with me since then. And I think are critically important right now as Elon exits the government. And in some ways, Doge is complete and utter failure in terms of like cost cutting and efficiency, which was never really the goal. But in terms of some of the outcomes that she's highlighting here, Doge was very important. I mean, one of them being like now his companies are just not going to be regulated. So if you want to destroy the state and put more power in the hands of, corporate barons like Elon Musk, Donald Trump, et cetera, in that way, Doge was actually successful.
And she was the genius that came up with the idea of the shock doctrine, which is whenever there's some sort of an emergency, the government in power uses that to implement whatever change they want to implement, whether or not it's related to the emergency. And usually it's not. Think about Bush and the Patriot Act and the Iraq War in the wake of 9/11. Like, they knew that Iraq didn't attack us, but they wanted to go to war with Iraq. That was the project for a new American century. It was the neocon playbook. It's what they wanted to do. So they exploited that tragedy to then do what they wanted to do anyway. She came up with that, so anytime she talks about anything, I'm likely to listen.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Before we get into that, though, there's some interesting new polling out on the abundance versus populism debate, and the numbers here are quite stark. So we can go ahead and put this up. So this group, Demand Progress, which is a progressive advocacy organization, they decided to poll on whether the abundance messaging or a populist messaging is more appealing to voters. And they broke it down by partisan divisions as well. So they defined the abundance argument by starting off with this sentence. The big problem is bottlenecks that make it harder to produce housing, expand energy production, or build new roads and bridges. The populist argument they described as, quote, the big problem is that big corporations have way too much power over our economy and our government. So overall, voters, so when you talk about Democrats, Republicans, Independents, overall, voters preferred the populist argument, and it was 56% to 44%. But perhaps even more significant when you're considering, the context of like an intra-Democratic Party debate at this point, there was an overwhelming preference for the populist argument here. You had 59% of Democrats who preferred the populist argument versus just 17% on the abundance one. And actually the numbers for independents.
17%?
17,
wow.
17.
Wow.
Yes. 59% to 17% for the abundance one. So it was a butt whooping in this poll, and the independent numbers also were quite stark. Like, it was similarly overwhelming in favor of the populist direction.
So what were the numbers for independents?
I'll have to pull those up.
Okay,
they're not in this article, but I saw someone tweet about it, and it was similarly overwhelming.
Let me just tell everybody what abundance liberalism is. So in the wake of Trump getting back in the White House, you had Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. These are two like well-known liberal data wonk type guys. They released this book, and the book is like a critique of the Democratic Party and the direction they think the Democratic Party should go moving forward. And the idea of it is, I want to be kind to it. I want to be fair. I don't want to straw man them, but I do think it's fair to say it's just sort of like neoliberalism rebranded, because their number one issue that they're focused the most on is zoning reform. They're big YIMBYs. YIMBY stands for yes in my backyard. In other words, we should be able to build more housing, don't have nearly as many restrictions against housing as we do right now. They think getting rid of those regulations, allowing more housing, that the outcome would be way better for the public. To which I say, look, in some circumstances, am I a YIMBY? Do I want to like get rid of stringent rules that restrict building houses? Sure, I'm fine with that. But the idea that that's the core of your politics, and that's the thing that you think is like the defining issue of our time, that completely and utterly misses the mark. Because anybody with a functioning brain at this point knows, the problem is the corruption and the billionaires and the multinational corporations that have rigged the system. And it's never been more apparent watching Trump's fascist takeover and Elon Musk's robber baron coup.
Yeah.
I mean, all the money is going to the rich, massive tax cuts for the rich while they raise taxes on everybody else. Every piece of legislation that comes up is in some way or another just a benefit to the corporations and the rich while not helping regular people. I mean, slashing Medicaid like crazy, that's horrible for regular people. So in this moment, from my perspective, the argument you have to be making is billionaires bad, government good.
Yeah.
Social Security is good, super fucking popular. Medicare, same thing. Medicaid, same thing. In this moment, to try to, you're feeding into the right-wing narrative if the core of your argument is this government thing is bad. And that's what they're doing. Oh my God, all the regulations are so bad. Let's get rid of those regulations. Well, what do you call that, Crystal, when you talk about capitalism and you talk about, oh, these burdensome regulations? That's called neoliberalism.
Yeah.
Right? So it's rebranding neoliberalism. And I feel like it's, this is not the time to make that argument. It's really a shame.
Here's the thing is there's a lot to say about it. So first of all, many times the groups putting the burdensome regulations in place that make it impossible to build are those large corporations. So Ezra famously sort of like got called out on this. He went on the Jon Stewart show and he laid out this example of, okay, in Build Back Better, or in the Inflation Reduction Act, originally Build Back Better, whatever. Anyway, they had all this money for rural broadband access and it didn't get deployed effectively. And he went through, here's this list of steps, and this is why they had all these bureaucratic hurdles to jump through in order to build out rural broadband. But when the Biden administration officials who actually were involved in crafting this legislation and implementing this legislation, when they heard what he had to say, one of them actually came on Breaking Points and was like, well, you know who put those provisions in place? It wasn't well-intentioned liberals. It was mostly Republicans who were aligned with the existing private internet service providers who wanted to make sure that there wasn't a public government competitor that they were having to deal with. And this is often the case. And the book, which I have fully read, and I've read all the arguments and all that stuff, because I know a lot of times critics get accused of oh, you didn't even read the book. I read the book. I talked to Derek Thompson. I read all the reviews. I did all the things. Okay, I promise you. They like to point the finger at the chief villain that architected these regulations being like liberal do-gooders who it made sense at a point in time, and now it's time to roll that back. I don't even disagree that in certain instances that is the case. But where they really go astray, in my opinion, is when they go from making these sort of targeted critiques of this or that, California regulation here, New York regulation there, or whatever, to justifying this being the focus of a large political project and movement that they expect to not only be effective in terms of policy outcomes and delivering this abundance that they claim stripping these regulations back would deliver, which there's no evidence that that would actually be the case, but also that it would be effective as a mass political movement and would help Democrats win back power. And that was the piece to me that was always if you're just going to write a book about oh, we could do this little YIMBY reform here, we could do this little, okay, fine, no problem. Where people really objected was when this is being crafted as this is the answer to Democrats' problems. And instead of rallying around this anti-oligarchy message that is clearly working and people are clearly responding to, instead of that, we should focus in on zoning reform, basically. I am strawmanning a little bit with that, but, on abundance. And that's where, I think the most largest amount of pushback has been. And these numbers demonstrate that, as a political project, as an attempt for Democrats to win back political power, this is a dud. Okay,
so a few things. First of all, this is very top-down. This is not organic. This is top down. It's Ezra Klein. It's Derek Thompson. They're funded by these Democratic think tanks. This is an attempt to come up with an ideology and sort of superimpose it on what's actually bubbling in the grassroots right now. So that's the first point. It's definitely top down. It is not grassroots. It's not like the anti-oligarchy tour. It's not like the shit like Tim Walz is saying at these town halls calling ICE the Gestapo, where they're really tapping into what's happening with the base. Right? That's first point. Second point is, it's not new. Can we stop pretending like this is new? I mean, Kamala ran on YIMBYism was one of the things she ran on, and I don't necessarily disagree with that.
By the way, Bernie ran on zoning reform and YIMBYism as well.
So it's not. This isn't new. And also, again, the dominant feature of the Democratic Party in the modern era, from Bill Clinton and onward, has been a healthy chunk of neoliberalism. Has been a healthy chunk of we're going to be the ones to get rid of the red tape and things of that nature. I think it drives me crazy that they're trying to act like we reinvented something. And it's you did the exact opposite. You're putting a new shiny coat of paint on the shit that they were already fucking doing.
Yeah.
Right? Go ahead.
It feels like an attempt, and I don't know that this is like intentional. Derek and Ezra have been writing about this stuff for a while, but it feels like an attempt of like, okay, there's this moment where the Democratic base is more radicalized than they've probably been in my lifetime.
Than they've ever been.
Yeah. And they are massively responding to Bernie and AOC and are ready to name the villain. Like, it's really clear what the Democratic base wants.
100%.
You know, inequality, oligarchy, plutocracy, like money in politics, they're ready to go, right? We've got a villain to compete with the bullshit villains on the right. We've got this message locked and loaded. And what this feels like is an attempt to redirect energy away from that, to undercut that, to say that's not really the problem, that's not really what's going on, and here's an alternative explanation. And one of the things, you know, once they write out what the abundance argument is here, you know, the big problem is bottlenecks that make it harder to produce housing versus the populist argument, which is the big problem is that big corporations have way too much freaking power. I mean, even when you just read it out, anyone with 3 brain cells will see which one is more not only politically potent, but which one has more explanatory power for understanding the actual world that we live in and the problems that we are facing, especially at a time when you do have Trump in the White House and you do have the, like a dozen billionaires who are in his cabinet and this alliance with the MAGA right and the tech right and these tech barons who, you know, it's very appropriate to the Naomi Klein conversation, who are literally trying to take over not only the country but the world. So if your political project is an aim squarely at undercutting their power and restoring small d democracy so that we all have a stake in this rapidly approaching future, you just are missing the mark. So again, you read the book, you see some things, you're like, oh, sure, you know, like do that zoning reform here, do that, you know, let's figure out how we can get the high-speed rail done. I'm all on board with that. But if your villain is basically like liberal do-gooders who put too much regulation in place at a time when a group of oligarchs is taking over and like implementing fascism as we speak, I just don't think that that either services in this moment as like really identifying the core problems, nor do I think that it has this sort of political potency that we need in order for a stronger movement to take out the fascists.
Yeah, and I'm sure front and center is not, we need single payer, universal health care, Medicare for all. I'm sure front and center is not, we need to raise the minimum wage. I'm sure front and center is not, we need to pass the PRO Act so everybody can join a union. I'm sure front and center is not, we need to massively raise taxes on the wealthy and redistribute in the form of the social safety net.
Right.
Like, to the extent any of those guys support any of those things or a version or another of them, those are side points, right? Those are like a little tweak here, little tweak there.
Yes.
Right? They're not as bad as like the hardcore libertarians who think only capitalism, unfettered completely. Like, they have elements of, they're still Democrats, right?
Right.
But again, to your point, guys, at a time when we saw the cuts that Elon Musk was making, completely illegally, by the way, totally unconstitutional on every level. Pediatric cancer research, cut. NIH funding, cut. Meals on Wheels, cut. CFPB, the anti-scam police, cut. Nuclear safety officials, including the top one, who look after our nuclear weapons and keep them safe, he was fired, then they had to beg for him to come back. 50% of the Social Security offices, cut. Cuts to Medicaid, et cetera, et cetera. When you look at a situation like that, the answer is staring you in the face. The problem is the oligarchs. The problem are the billionaires. The government is good, and they're destroying every good thing about the government. We're here to defend the government. We're here to beef up the government. We're here to say the era of big government is over is bullshit. We want a new era of big government because big government has the capacity to do good things for you, which is why FDR got elected 4 times straight, and he had 80% of the House and 80% of the Senate at his peak. These are the arguments you need to make. If you're not making that argument, take a back seat, which leads to my final point, which is, look, if you're attacking Trump right now, the main villain, I'm willing to be in a big tent umbrella with you where we're roughly on the same side. I'm totally fine with that. But the next time Democrats get back in power, let's not pretend like you're working on some new shit and it wasn't the case for the Democratic Party since the fucking 1990s. You've had your go. Now you get in the back seat and let the leftists drive, let the progressives drive, let the social democrats drive. Because guess what? There's going to be way better results with them in charge, as there always is. There's a reason why AMLO was as popular as he was, and Claudia Sheinbaum is as popular as she is. There's a reason why Lula in Brazil is as popular as he is.
Right.
Because when you actually fundamentally deliver, believe in the power of government to do good, and get that done, then people love you, right? And that's why that poll is as devastating as it is. And it just feels, to your point, like this is very, very top down, very funded by big money Democrats. It's a way to say, no. Don't blame the oligarchs. Don't blame the billionaires. Just come back over here, nice to a softer pro-capitalist version of democratic politics. And it's like, I'm sorry, bro. It's all so obvious to us now what's going on. It's time to change direction.
There's also there's a slipperiness and a squishiness to their arguments. So Sam tried to pin Ezra down on this in their debate of like, okay, Ezra talks about everything bagel liberalism, where, okay, you're going to do broadband, but you're going to layer it with, like, you're going to have an equity requirement. You're going to have a child care on site requirement. You're going to have prevailing wage requirements, which have been really, really popular. And by the way, were, implemented during the FDR era, and we were sure able to build stuff then. In any case, when you try to pin them down on, okay, well, which of these interests should be jettisoned? Like, is it the environmental groups you want to jettison? Is it the labor groups you want to jettison? Like, which, is it tenant advocacy? Like, is it the child care? Which part do you want to jettison? They don't really want to say, because that makes it easy to critique. If you are saying, like, well, fuck the labor unions, we need to just build as fast as we can and pay people whatever, they're going to just, like, take it, and we need to get rid of these safety standards that are out of control, then it's, like, really clear whose side they're on, and it makes it much easier to critique. And so they try to leave things. It's this very sweeping and somewhat anecdotal, and it makes it very difficult to undercut some of the arguments. But in any case, I think the polling is an important piece, just to wrap it up, because they want to submit this not just as policy proposals, of which, again, some of them have merit. They also want to submit it as a political project, and this is just devastating proof that the political project aspect of it is a complete and total dud.
Hey guys, we spoke to Naomi Klein on this week's Crystal, Kyle and Friends. We spoke about end times fascism. She gets into exactly what the ideology is of these tech billionaire overlords. And by the way, it's incredibly weird. It's incredibly scary and freaky, but we dive into all that. Sign up on Substack to watch the full thing as soon as it drops.